Dr. Elena Vasquez rubbed her tired eyes and stared at the massive wall of screens in front of her. The deep space monitoring station was quiet tonight, floating in the cold darkness beyond Pluto. She had been working the night shift for 3 months now, listening to the endless silence of space. It was the year 2387, and Earth felt very far away from here. 50 years had passed since humanity decided to leave the galactic community. They called it the Great Isolation, but Elena remembered her grandmother's stories about the real reason they left. The other alien species in the galaxy had grown afraid of humans. They said human weapons were too violent. They said human soldiers were too scary. They said humans thought too much like predators. So the Galactic Council made humanity sign the Pacification Accords. These treaties banned most human military technology. They wanted to make humans peaceful like the other species. But humans didn't like being told how to defend themselves. After years of arguing, humanity just packed up and left. They took their ships, their weapons, and their people, and went back to their own corner of space. Elena sipped her cold coffee and checked the time. 2 more hours until her shift ended. She was about to start her routine scan of the outer system when something strange appeared on her screen. A signal was coming from deep space, but it was using an old frequency that nobody had used for decades. She leaned forward and adjusted her equipment. The signal was very weak, like a whisper from across the galaxy. As she cleaned up the audio, her heart began to beat faster. This wasn't just any old signal. This was a distress beacon, and it was using a frequency that only one species knew how to use. The Lirani Elena's hands shook as she worked to decode the message. The Lirani had been humanity's closest friends in the galaxy. They were a peaceful species that lived on beautiful ocean worlds. Unlike the other aliens, they had never been afraid of humans. When the other species called humans too violent, the Lirani had defended them. When humanity left the galaxy, the Lirani had been sad to see them go. The message was old, very old. As Elena's computers worked to translate it, she realized this signal had been traveling through space for almost 50 years. It had been sent right around the time humanity left the galaxy. Finally, the translation appeared on her screen. Elena read it once, then read it again, her face growing pale. To our human friends, wherever you may be. This is Elder Kethmos of the Lirani Republic. Our worlds are under attack. The hegemony of Sektar has invaded our space. They came without warning, without mercy. Our fleets are destroyed. Our people are dying. Elena's coffee cup fell from her hand and shattered on the floor, but she didn't notice. She kept reading. The Galactic Council refuses to help us. They say the Sektar have the right to expand their territory. They say we should surrender peacefully. But we know what happens to species that surrender to the Sektar. They become slaves or they disappear entirely. The message continued, and Elena felt tears forming in her eyes. We remember the humans. We remember how you fought beside us during the Proxima border wars. We remember how you never abandoned your friends, even when the cost was high. The galaxy has forgotten what honor means, but we know humans still remember. Elena stood up so fast her chair fell over. She rushed to her communication panel and began checking the signal's origin point. The message had come from the Kepler 442 system, over 1,200 light-years away. That was where Lyra Prime was located, the Lirani homeworld. But if the message was 50 years old, what did that mean? Were the Lirani still alive? Had they won their war? Had they lost everything? Elena dove back into her computers, using every tool she had to analyze the signal. Deep in the data, she found something that made her heart race. The message contained quantum-encrypted coordinates, hidden in a way that only someone looking very carefully would find them. The coordinates pointed to other star systems, other Lirani colonies. And some of these coordinates were recent, updated just months ago. Someone was still out there, still fighting. Still hoping that their old human friends might hear their call for help. Elena ran through the empty corridors of the monitoring station, her footsteps echoing off the metal walls. She burst into the communication center and began setting up a priority transmission to Earth. This message needed to reach Admiral Marcus Chen immediately. Chen was the commander of the Terran Defense Fleet, and Elena knew he had fought alongside the Lirani decades ago. If anyone would understand what this message meant, it would be him. As she waited for the transmission to connect, Elena thought about the galaxy they had left behind. For 50 years, humanity had focused on building better ships, better weapons, better defenses. They told themselves they were protecting their own space, keeping their own people safe. But maybe they had been preparing for something else. Maybe they had been getting ready for the day when their friends would need them again. The communication panel lit up, and Admiral Chen's weathered face appeared on the screen. Even through the video link, Elena could see the intelligence in his dark eyes, the strength that had made him a legend among human military officers. "Dr. Vasquez," Chen said. "It's late. This better be important." "Admiral," Elena said, her voice trembling, "I've received a distress signal from the Lirani Republic. They're under attack by the Sectar hegemony. They're asking for help." Chen's expression didn't change, but Elena saw something flicker in his eyes. "How old is this signal?" 47 years, sir. But there are recent updates. Someone is still fighting. Someone is still hoping will come." For a long moment, Chen said nothing. Elena could almost see him thinking, remembering the friends he had left behind when humanity withdrew from the galaxy. Finally, he spoke. "Send me everything, Doctor. Every piece of data, every coordinate, every detail you can find, and prepare a full analysis for the Terran Congress. If our friends are in trouble, then we need to decide what we're going to do about it." "Yes, sir," Elena said. "Sir, do you think we'll help them?" Chen's face was grim, but there was something else there too. Something that looked like hope or maybe determination. "Doctor, there's something you need to understand about humans. We might leave the galaxy. We might isolate ourselves for decades. We might let the other species forget about us entirely. But we never ever abandon our friends." The transmission ended, leaving Elena alone in the communication center. Outside the station's windows, the stars continued their ancient dance, cold and distant. But somewhere among those stars, friends were waiting. Friends who had kept humanity's frequency alive for 50 years, believing that someday, somehow, the humans would hear their call. Elena looked at her screens one more time, at the message that had traveled so far and waited so long to be found. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, the galaxy would remember why they had been afraid of humans in the first place. But tonight, all Elena could think about was a simple truth her grandmother had taught her long ago. Real friends don't abandon each other, no matter how far apart they are, no matter how much time has passed. The signal had been received. Now it was time to answer. Admiral Marcus Chen stood in the war room of Terra Central Command, staring at the holographic display floating above the table. The image showed the Kepler 442 system, with red markers indicating Sectar fleet positions around Lyra Prime. 47 years too late, but the data was still there, still calling out for help. "Show me the current intelligence," Chen said to his aide. Commander Sarah Kim touched her tablet, and new information appeared on the display. "Based on Dr. Vasquez's analysis of the hidden coordinates, we've identified 17 Lirani colonies still sending signals. Most are under siege, but they're fighting back with guerrilla tactics." Chen nodded slowly. He remembered the Lirani from the Proxima border wars. They were peaceful by nature, but when pushed to defend their families, they could be surprisingly fierce. Their underwater cities and deep ocean technology had made them valuable allies back then. "What about the Sectar?" Chen asked. "Intelligence suggests they have expanded significantly since we left the galaxy," Kim replied. "They now control over 40 star systems. They use a simple strategy: overwhelming force followed by complete subjugation. Species that resist are eliminated. Species that surrender become slave labor." The door to the war room opened and President Sarah Okafor walked in, followed by several members of the Terran Congress. Okafor was a small woman with gray hair and sharp eyes, but Chen knew she had grown up on Mars during the terraforming wars. She understood what it meant to fight for survival. "Admiral," Okafor said, taking her seat at the head of the table, "I've read Dr. Vasquez's report. Tell me what you think we should do." Chen straightened. "Madam President, the Lirani were our allies. They stood with us when the rest of the galaxy wanted to limit our sovereignty. They defended us when other species called us too dangerous. If they're in trouble, we have a moral obligation to help them." Congressman Martinez leaned forward. "Admiral, that was 50 years ago. We've built a good life here in isolation. Our colonies are thriving. Our people are safe. Why should we risk that to get involved in galactic politics again?" "Because," Chen said firmly, "humans don't abandon their friends." Representative Chen spoke up from the back of the room. "But Admiral, what if it's a trap? What if the Sectar are using this to draw us out? We've been hiding our military developments for 50 years. If we reveal our capabilities now, every species in the galaxy will know what we've been building." Chen smiled grimly. Good. Maybe it's time they remembered why they were afraid of us in the first place. President Okafor raised her hand for silence. Let's be practical. What kind of force would we need to make a difference? Commander Kim activated a new display. Based on sector fleet dispositions, we estimate they have between 1,500 and 2,000 ships in Lirani space. They favor large, heavily armored vessels designed for intimidation and planetary bombardment. And what do we have? Okafor asked. Chen's expression grew serious. We have 847 warships ready for immediate deployment. Our technology has advanced significantly during the isolation period. We've been building ships specifically designed for the conditions around Sol. High radiation, intense gravity fields, solar storms. Our vessels are faster, more maneuverable, and more heavily armed than anything we had 50 years ago. Are 800 ships enough to fight 2,000? Martinez asked. Congressman, Chen said, you're thinking like a politician. You're counting ships. But wars aren't won by counting ships. They're won by understanding what you're fighting for and being willing to do whatever it takes to protect it. Representative Singh stood up. Admiral, I respect your confidence, but the pacification accords are still in effect. If we break them, we'll be in violation of galactic law. Chen's voice grew cold. The pacification accords were designed to protect the galaxy from us. But who's protecting the galaxy from the sector? Who's protecting the innocent species being enslaved and slaughtered, while the Galactic Council looks the other way? President Okafor stood and walked to the holographic display. She studied the image of Lyra Prime surrounded by enemy ships. Admiral, if we do this, there's no going back. Once we break isolation, once we reveal what we've become, everything changes. Yes, ma'am, Chen agreed. Everything changes. Okafor turned to face the room. I'm calling for an emergency vote of the full Congress. All representatives will be here within 6 hours. We'll debate this properly, and we'll make our decision as a unified species. As the politicians filed out of the room, Chen remained behind with Commander Kim. She looked at him with concern. Sir, do you really think we can win against those odds? Chen walked over to the viewport and looked out at Earth's blue oceans and white clouds. Sarah, 50 years ago, the galaxy told us we were too violent, too dangerous, too much like predators. They were afraid of what we might become if we kept developing our military technology. And now? Kim asked. Chen smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. Now they're about to find out what we became. 6 hours later, the emergency session of the Terran Congress convened. Representatives from every human colony, every space station, every outpost gathered either in person or by hologram. President Okafor stood at the podium and presented the situation clearly and honestly. The debate was intense but surprisingly brief. Representative after representative stood to speak, but they all said essentially the same thing. The Lyrani had been humanity's friends, and friends don't abandon each other. The final vote was unanimous, 847 in favor, 0 against, 0 abstentions. President Okafor looked directly at Admiral Chen. Admiral, you have authorization to deploy the full Terran Defense Fleet. Your mission is to render assistance to the Lirani Republic and any other species under threat from the sector hegemony. You are authorized to use any means necessary to accomplish this mission. Chen saluted. Understood, Madam President. We'll need 4 weeks to assemble the fleet and prepare for the journey. Admiral, Okafor said, bring our friends home. 3 weeks later, Chen stood on the bridge of the TDS Indomitable, humanity's newest and most powerful dreadnought. Around him, the largest human fleet ever assembled prepared for departure. 847 ships, dreadnoughts, battleships, cruisers, destroyers, and support vessels, all equipped with technology the galaxy had never seen. Dr. Elena Vasquez had joined the fleet as a communications specialist and xenolinguist. She stood beside Chen on the bridge, watching the final preparations. Admiral, she said quietly, what if we're too late? What if the Lyrani are already gone? Chen looked at her with the confidence of a man who had spent 50 years preparing for this moment. Doctor, we received their signal. That means someone is still out there, still fighting, still hoping. As long as there's hope, there's a chance. The fleet navigator announced, all ships report ready for hyperspace jump. Chen activated the fleet communication system. His voice carried to every ship, every crew member, every human who had volunteered for this mission. This is Admiral Chen. 50 years ago, we left the galaxy because they told us we were too dangerous. Today, we return to show them the difference between dangerous and evil. We go to help our friends. We go to protect the innocent. We go to remind the galaxy that some things are worth fighting for no matter the cost. He paused, looking out at the stars that had called his species home for millennia. The galaxy forgot that humans don't abandon their friends. Today we remind them. All ships jump to hyperspace. Let's go bring our people home. The space around the fleet shimmered, and 847 human warships disappeared into the darkness between stars, carrying with them the hopes of a species that had spent 50 years learning that sometimes the greatest strength comes from knowing what you're willing to fight for. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler 442 system, and what Admiral Chen saw through the main view screen made his blood run cold. Lyra Prime hung in space like a dying jewel, its beautiful blue oceans now streaked with brown and red. Massive sector ships surrounded the planet like vultures, their dark hulls blocking out the light of the system's star. "My God," whispered Dr. Vasquez, standing beside Chen on the bridge. "What have they done to it?" Commander Kim was already analyzing the tactical display. "Admiral, I'm reading 2,037 sector vessels in this system. They have the planet completely blockaded. And sir," she paused, her voice shaking, "they're bombarding the ocean cities." Chen's hands gripped the railing in front of him. "Casualties?" "Unknown, sir. But based on the toxin readings in the water, it's bad. Very bad." The communication officer looked up from her station. "Admiral, we're receiving a transmission from the planet's surface. It's weak, coming from deep underwater." "Put it through," Chen ordered. The main screen flickered and a Lirani face appeared. Elder Kethmos looked much older than Chen remembered, his blue-green skin marked with scars, his large eyes filled with exhaustion. Behind him, Chen could see water dripping from damaged walls and the dim glow of emergency lighting. "Is this real?" Kethmos asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Are you truly here, my human friends?" Chen stepped forward. "Elder Kethmos, this is Admiral Marcus Chen of the Terran Defense Fleet. We received your message. We're here to help." Tears began flowing down the Lirani leader's face. 47 years we have waited. 47 years we have fought. My people. There are so few of us left. What's your situation? Chen asked. We have 200 million civilians trapped in the deep ocean cities, Kethmos explained. The sector have been poisoning our waters for months. Our defense fleet was destroyed in the first week of the war. We have perhaps 1,000 small vessels left, fishing boats and civilian craft, but they are no match for sector warships. Chen studied the tactical display. The sector fleet was massive, spread across the entire system. Their ships were huge, designed for intimidation and destruction rather than actual combat. They had been fighting an enemy that couldn't fight back. That was about to change. "Commander Kim," Chen said, "initiate Protocol Omega. All ships are to broadcast on standard frequencies." Kim looked surprised. "Sir, Protocol Omega? Are you sure? Do it." Across the human fleet, communication officers began broadcasting on every frequency the sector used. But these weren't normal military communications. They were sounds from Earth, thunderstorms rolling across ancient continents, volcanic eruptions that had shaped humanity's homeworld, the crash of massive waves against rocky shores, and mixed in with the sounds of Earth's fury was something else: human laughter. The sound of a species that had learned to find joy in the face of impossible odds, that had developed a sense of humor in the middle of disasters. On the bridge of the sector flagship, General Vexkar listened to the strange transmissions with growing confusion. The reptilian commander had conquered 17 species in his long career, but he had never heard anything like this. "What are those sounds?" he hissed to his communications officer. "Unknown, General. But the new ships, they're small. Only 800 of them. Should we demand their surrender?" Vexkar's yellow eyes studied the tactical display. The human ships were indeed smaller than his own vessels and vastly outnumbered. "Send them the standard surrender demand. Tell them they have one chance to withdraw before we destroy them." The human response came immediately. Admiral Chen's face appeared on Vexkar's screen, and the sector general was surprised by what he saw. The human looked calm, almost relaxed, despite facing overwhelming odds. "General Vexkar," Chen said, "I am Admiral Marcus Chen of the Terran Defense Fleet. You have attacked our allies. You have 47 minutes to withdraw your forces from this system." Vexcar's jaw dropped open. 47 minutes? Human, you are outnumbered more than 2 to 1. Your ships are smaller than my destroyers. Do you not understand your situation? Chen smiled, and something about that expression made Vexcar uncomfortable. General, I understand the situation perfectly. The question is, do you? You have 47 minutes, Chen continued, because that's how long our friends have been waiting for help. After that, we stop asking nicely. The transmission ended, leaving Vexcar staring at a blank screen. In all his years of conquest, no one had ever spoken to him like that. Species either surrendered immediately or begged for mercy. They didn't make demands. General, his tactical officer reported, the human ships are moving into attack formation. Vexcar watched the human fleet spread out across the system. Their movements were strange, chaotic, not following any standard battle doctrine he knew. But there was something about their formation that reminded him of something he couldn't quite identify. All ships, Vexcar commanded, prepare for battle. Show these humans what happens to species that defy the Sectar hegemony. Admiral Chen stood on his bridge, watching the Sectar fleet begin to move. Commander Kim was coordinating with the other human ships, her voice calm and professional. Admiral, she reported, all ships report ready. The Sectar are forming up in standard intimidation formation. Large ships in front, smaller vessels supporting. Perfect, Chen said. They're fighting the last war, not this one. Dr. Vasquez, open a channel to Elder Kethmos. The Lirani leader's face appeared on screen again. Admiral, you must flee. There are too many of them. Elder, Chen said gently. Watch and learn. This is what humans have been doing for the last 50 years. The battle began when the Sectar flagship fired its massive main cannon at the human dreadnought Indomitable. The energy beam lanced through space, enough power to destroy a small moon. But the human ship wasn't where the beam struck. It had moved at the last second, sliding sideways through space with an agility that should have been impossible for something so large. The return fire from the Indomitable was unlike anything the Sectar had ever seen. Instead of trying to punch through their heavy armor, the human weapons seemed designed to cause chaos. Electromagnetic pulses shut down ship systems. Gravitational distortion weapons pulled Sectar vessels out of formation. And when human ships fired their kinetic weapons, they aimed not for the bridge or engines, but for life support systems. They're not trying to destroy our ships, Vexcar's tactical officer reported in confusion. They're trying to kill our crews, but that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was how the humans fought. Sectar doctrine was based on intimidation, on overwhelming force that broke enemy morale, but the humans seemed to enjoy the fight. Their ships danced through space like they were built for this chaos, and their radio chatter was filled with jokes and encouragement. A human destroyer, badly damaged and surrounded by 3 Sectar cruisers, suddenly accelerated directly toward the largest enemy ship. Instead of trying to escape, it was attacking. The destroyer's captain could be heard laughing over the radio as his ship rammed into the Sectar cruiser, both vessels exploding in a brilliant flash. What kind of species does that? Vexcar whispered. His answer came from Admiral Chen's voice. Broadcast on all frequencies. The kind that doesn't abandon friends. The human attack wasn't following any military doctrine Vexcar understood. They fought like the storms on their homeworld, chaotic, unpredictable, and utterly relentless. Human ships worked in small groups, supporting each other with a coordination that seemed almost telepathic, and they kept broadcasting those sounds from Earth. Thunder, lightning, the roar of predators that had hunted across ancient continents, the laughter of a species that had learned to find joy in struggle. Dr. Vasquez, monitoring communications from the planet's surface, heard something that made her smile. Lirani voices speaking in their musical language, but the meaning was clear even without translation. They were cheering. For the first time in 47 years, they had hope. On the Sectar flagship, General Vexcar watched his perfect formation dissolve into chaos. His ships were larger, more heavily armed, and more numerous, but they were being torn apart by an enemy that fought like gravity storms and solar flares. General, his communications officer reported, we're receiving surrender requests from our own ships. Vexcar couldn't believe it. Our ships are surrendering? Yes, sir. The humans, they're not destroying vessels that surrender. They're taking prisoners and treating wounded. Some of our crews are choosing to give up rather than fight. For the first time in his career, General Vexkar faced an enemy that was not only willing to die for their cause, but was somehow making his own troops question whether their cause was worth dying for. As another group of his ships fell to human attack, Vexkar realized something that chilled him to his core. He had spent his entire life conquering species that fought to survive. But humans didn't fight to survive, they fought to protect others, and that made them infinitely more dangerous than anything he had ever encountered. News of the battle at Lyra Prime spread across the galaxy faster than any ship could travel. On 1,000 worlds, species that had forgotten the name human suddenly remembered why that word had once made the Galactic Council nervous. On the crystalline world of Zephyr III, the mining slaves heard whispered reports that humans had returned to fight the Sectar. The Zephyrians had been forced to work in the deep crystal caves for 15 years, their beautiful singing voices silenced by Sectar collar devices. But when they heard about Lyra Prime, something changed. The crystal beings began to hum very quietly at first, then louder. The harmonic frequency of their combined voices shattered every collar device in the mines. On the insectoid worlds of the Veltar Collective, worker drones stopped their endless labor and looked up at the sky. The Veltar had been enslaved so long they had almost forgotten what freedom meant. But the news from Lyra Prime reminded them of old stories, legends about a species that fought not for conquest but for friendship. The drones began to organize, sharing information through their chemical communication networks. Even on peaceful worlds far from Sectar territory, the news had an impact. Species that had grown comfortable under Galactic Council protection began to ask uncomfortable questions. If the humans were right about the Sectar, what else might they be right about? In the great chambers of the Galactic Council on Altair Prime, Chancellor Morden called an emergency session. The tall gray-skinned Altarian was considered one of the most diplomatic leaders in the galaxy, skilled at finding peaceful solutions to complex problems. But the human return was a problem he had never expected to face. The humans have violated the pacification accords, announced Councillor Rextai of the Bovine Confederation. His species valued order above all else, and the human attack on Sectar forces was clearly a violation of galactic law. They attacked without council approval, agreed Councillor Thindal of the Aquatic Alliance. This is exactly the kind of aggressive behavior the Accords were designed to prevent. Chancellor Morden studied the reports from Lyra Prime. The battle was over, and the humans had won. General Vexkar's fleet had been destroyed or captured, and human ships were now in orbit around the Lyrani homeworld, helping with rescue operations, but the implications were staggering. What do we know about current human military capabilities? Morden asked. Defense Coordinator Kelvon activated a holographic display. Very little, Chancellor. They've been in isolation for 50 years, but based on the battle reports from Lyra Prime, their technology has advanced significantly. Their ships are faster and more maneuverable than anything in our databases. Their weapon systems are designed for maximum psychological impact as well as physical damage. Psychological impact? Asked Councillor Rextai. They broadcast sounds from their homeworld during the battle, Kelvin explained. Recordings of natural disasters, predator calls, and human laughter. It appears to have had a devastating effect on Sectar morale. The council chamber was quiet for a moment. Finally, Councillor Thindal spoke. We need to demand they withdraw immediately. The pacification accords are clear. Are they? Asked a new voice. All heads turned as the chamber doors opened. Dr. Elena Vasquez walked in, flanked by 2 human diplomatic guards. She wore a simple blue uniform with the insignia of the Terran Republic, and she carried herself with quiet confidence. Dr. Vasquez, Chancellor Mordun said carefully, this is unexpected. The Terran Republic has not been a member of this council for 50 years. No, Elena agreed, taking her place at the speaker's podium. We haven't, but we're here now and we have things to discuss. The humans must withdraw from Lyrani space immediately, Councillor Rextai demanded. You've violated galactic law, Elena smiled calmly. Which law would that be, Councillor? The law that says species can't defend their allies? The law that says genocide is acceptable as long as it's done by the right people? Or perhaps you're referring to the law that says the Council can ignore suffering as long as it's convenient? Chancellor Morden raised his hand for silence. Dr. Vasquez, the humans signed the pacification accords. Those agreements are still in effect, are they? Elena asked again. She activated her own holographic display, showing the original treaty documents. The pacification accords state that humanity agrees to limit its military development in exchange for guaranteed protection of human interests by the Galactic Council. Tell me, Chancellor, how did the Council protect the Lyrani? They were our allies. They defended us when other species wanted us restrained. Where was their protection? The Council chamber erupted in arguments. Species representatives shouted at each other in a dozen different languages, but Elena simply stood at the podium waiting. Finally, Chancellor Mordun restored order. The situation with the Lyrani was complex. Complex? Elena's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. 200 million civilians were being slowly poisoned to death, and you call it complex? Chancellor, the pacification accords were a two-way agreement. We agreed to limit our military in exchange for Council protection of our interests. You broke that agreement first. The Council cannot intervene in every territorial dispute. Councillor Thindal protested. This wasn't a territorial dispute, Elena replied. This was genocide. And if the Council won't protect innocent species from genocide, then the Council has failed in its most basic responsibility. On the other side of the galaxy, Admiral Chen was dealing with more immediate problems. The liberation of Lyra Prime was just the beginning. Intelligence reports were coming in from across sector space, and the picture they painted was disturbing. Admiral, Commander Kim reported, we're receiving signals from 17 different systems. The news of our victory is spreading and enslaved species are starting to revolt. Chen studied the tactical display. Red markers showed sector fleet positions, but many of them were now moving, responding to uprisings on their own worlds. What about sector reinforcements? Chen asked. They're pulling ships back from their frontier worlds to deal with the rebellions, Kim replied. But sir, that means they're abandoning some of their more recent conquests. Those worlds are asking for help, Chen nodded slowly. This was what he had been afraid of. The battle at Lyra Prime hadn't ended the conflict. It had started a galactic war. Dr. Vasquez's voice came through the communication system from Altair Prime. Admiral, I'm transmitting the Council's official response to our actions. Chen read the message and laughed. It was a formal demand for human withdrawal, with threats of economic sanctions and diplomatic isolation. Tell the Council, Chen said, that we've been diplomatically isolated for 50 years and we got along just fine. As for economic sanctions, they're welcome to try trading with the sector instead. On Lyra Prime, Elder Kethmos swam through the ruins of his capital city. Human engineering teams were working around the clock to repair the water purification systems, but the damage was extensive. Still, for the first time in years, the water was getting cleaner instead of more poisoned. A human diver approached him, her environmental suit allowing her to work in the deep ocean alongside the Lyrani. It was Dr. Sarah Chen, Admiral Chen's daughter and a specialist in aquatic ecosystem restoration. Elder, she said through her suit's communication system, we've identified the primary source of the toxins. The sector were using a biological weapon designed specifically to target Lyrani physiology. It's going to take months to completely neutralize it, but we can speed up the process significantly. How? Kethmos asked. We introduce earth bacteria that feed on the specific toxins. It's aggressive, but it works. The question is whether you trust us enough to let us modify your ocean's ecosystem. Kethmos was quiet for a moment, floating in the poisoned water that had been his people's home for thousands of years. Finally, he spoke. Dr. Chen, your people traveled across the galaxy to answer a message that was 50 years old. You fought impossible odds to save people you hadn't seen in half a century. I think we can trust you to help us clean our oceans. Back on Altair Prime, the Galactic Council was in chaos. Reports were flooding in from across the galaxy. Sector colonies in revolt. Human ships appearing in systems the Council had never heard of. And species that had been quiet for decades suddenly demanding answers about Council policies. Chancellor Mordun found himself facing the greatest crisis in the Council's history. The careful balance of power that had kept the galaxy peaceful for centuries was falling apart, and it was all because one species had decided to help their friends. Chancellor, his aide whispered, we're receiving a priority transmission from the Terran Republic. Dr. Vasquez again? Mordun asked. No, sir. This one is from their president. President Sarah Okafor appeared on the main screen, and Mordun was struck by the determination in her eyes. This was not a leader who could be intimidated or bargained with. Chancellor Morden, she said formally, the Terran Republic is hereby requesting readmission to the Galactic Council. We have matters of mutual concern to discuss. Under what terms? Morden asked carefully. Okafor's smile was not entirely friendly. Our terms, Chancellor. The galaxy has changed in the last few days. We think it's time the Council changed with it. As the transmission ended, Morden realized that the humans had done something remarkable. In less than a week, they had gone from galactic 6 months after the Battle of Lyra Prime. Admiral Marcus Chen stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the final Sector stronghold surrender. The fortress world of Sector Prime had fallen without a shot being fired. The hegemony's own people had opened the gates and handed over their leaders. Admiral, Commander Kim reported, General Vexkar is requesting to speak with you. Chen nodded. Put him through. The reptilian general appeared on screen. But he looked very different from the proud commander Chen had faced at Lyra Prime. Vexkar's scales were dull, his eyes filled with something Chen had never expected to see. Understanding. Admiral Chen, Vexkar said formally, I surrender myself and my remaining forces to human authority. But first I must ask you a question. Go ahead, General. How did you know? Vexkar asked. How did you know that my own people would turn against me? Chen considered the question carefully. General, you built an empire on fear. Your people followed you because they were afraid of what would happen if they didn't. But fear is a poor foundation for loyalty. When we gave them a choice between fear and hope, they chose hope. Vexkar was quiet for a moment. We conquered 17 species. We thought we were building something that would last forever. You were building something that would last until someone showed your subjects a better way, Chen replied. General, you and your people aren't evil. You're just lost. The good news is, lost can be fixed. On Altair Prime, the Galactic Council was meeting in emergency session for the 4th time that month. The Great Chamber was packed with representatives from species that had been silent for decades. The Zephyrian crystal singers filled one section with their haunting melodies. The Veltar insectoids had sent a delegation of their newly freed worker scholars. Even some former Sector colonies had sent representatives. President Sarah Okafor sat in the chair that had been empty for 50 years, the seat reserved for humanity. Beside her, Dr. Elena Vasquez served as humanity's chief diplomatic officer. The two women had become the most powerful political figures in the galaxy, and they had done it without firing a single shot. Chancellor Mordoon called the session to order. The council recognizes President Okafor of the Terran Republic. Okafor stood and the chamber fell silent. Thank you, Chancellor. I come before this council not as a conqueror, but as someone who believes in the original vision of galactic cooperation. 50 years ago, humanity left this chamber because we were told we were too dangerous. Today I stand before you to ask, dangerous to whom? She activated a holographic display showing the current state of the galaxy. In the 6 months since humans returned to galactic affairs, 17 species have been liberated from Sector rule. 43 worlds have established new governments based on representative democracy. Trade between previously isolated species has increased by 300%. Crime rates have dropped across civilized space. Councillor Rextai of the Bovine Confederation raised his hand. President Okafor, while these developments are positive, many species are concerned about human military superiority. Your fleets are now the most powerful force in the galaxy. Okafor smiled. Councillor Rextai, you're absolutely right. We are the most powerful military force in the galaxy. And do you know what we plan to do with that power? The chamber waited. We plan to share it, Okafor continued. The Terran Republic is announcing the creation of the Galactic Defense Force, a joint military organization designed to protect all member species from external threats and internal oppression. Admiral Chen will serve as its first commander, but every member species will be represented in its leadership. The chamber erupted in discussions. This was unprecedented. Never before had the dominant military power in the galaxy offered to share that dominance. Dr. Vasquez stood to address the chamber. The Defense Force will operate under 3 core principles: protection of the innocent, support for legitimate governments, and assistance to any species requesting help against oppression. These principles are not negotiable. Chancellor Morden looked troubled. Dr. Vasquez, who determines what constitutes a legitimate government or oppression? The same people who have always determined it. Vasquez replied. The ordinary citizens who live under those governments. The Defense Force will support any species that freely chooses their own path, and we will oppose any force that tries to take that choice away. On Lyra Prime, the restoration was nearly complete. The oceans were clean again, the cities were rebuilt, and millions of Lyrani who had been hiding in deep-sea shelters were returning to their homes. Elder Kethmos swam through the capital's main plaza, marveling at how it had been rebuilt with both Lyrani and human engineering. Dr. Sarah Chen approached him, her environmental suit no longer necessary in the clean water. She had been working on Lyra Prime for months, and the Lyrani had come to consider her one of their own. Elder, she said, I have good news. The last of the toxins have been neutralized. Your oceans are actually cleaner now than they were before the Sectar invasion. Kethmos's large eyes filled with tears of joy. Dr. Chen, how can we ever repay you for what your species has done? Sarah smiled. Elder, you already did. 50 years ago, when the rest of the galaxy was afraid of us, your people stood beside us and called us friends. That friendship saved your species, but it also saved ours. How did it save you? Kethmos asked. It gave us something worth fighting for, Sarah replied. Without that, all our ships and weapons would have been meaningless. Back on the human monitoring station beyond Pluto, Dr. Elena Vasquez's replacement was conducting routine scans of deep space. The young officer, Lieutenant Mark Torres, had heard the stories about the signal that changed everything, but he had never expected to find something similar. His instruments detected a weak transmission from the direction of the Andromeda Galaxy. As he worked to decode it, his excitement grew. The message was from a previously unknown species called the Kithari, and they were asking for help against something called the Dark Swarm. Torres immediately sent the signal to Admiral Chen, now commanding the Galactic Defense Force from his headquarters on Luna. Within hours, the response came back. Prepare a long-range reconnaissance mission. If someone needs help, we'll find a way to provide it. The message was signed simply, the species that doesn't abandon friends. On Earth, in the restored United Nations building in New York, President Okafor met with the leaders of humanity's various colonies and settlements. The meeting was being broadcast across human space, and the topic was one that would shape humanity's future for generations. The question before us, Okafor said, is simple. What kind of species do we want to be? For 50 years, we isolated ourselves and focused on our own development. We built better ships, better weapons, better technology. But we also learned something more important. She paused, looking out at the representatives of 1 billion human worlds. We learned that strength without purpose is meaningless. We learned that the most advanced technology in the galaxy is useless if you don't have anyone to share it with. We learned that friendship is the most powerful force in the universe. Representative Martinez from Mars raised his hand. Madam President, what if helping other species puts our own people at risk? What if our generosity is seen as weakness? Okafor smiled, and her expression reminded everyone why she had been chosen to lead humanity back into galactic civilization. Representative Martinez, do you know what our enemies call us now? They call us the species that fights for others. They call us the species that keeps its promises. They call us the species that travels across the galaxy to answer a 50-year-old distress call. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at Earth's blue sky and white clouds. I can't think of a better reputation to have. 10 years later, the galaxy was a very different place. The Galactic Defense Force included ships and personnel from over 200 species. Trade flowed freely between worlds that had never spoken to each other before humanity's return. The former Sectar colonies had formed a peaceful federation dedicated to making amends for their past actions. And in the deep oceans of Lyra Prime, human and Lyrani children played together, learning each other's languages and sharing stories about their worlds. They grew up in a galaxy where friendship was stronger than fear, where keeping promises mattered more than gaining power, and where no species would ever again have to wait 50 years for someone to answer their call for help. Dr. Elena Vasquez, now serving as humanity's ambassador to the Galactic Council, kept a copy of the original Lyrani distress signal on her desk. Sometimes when the political negotiations got difficult, or when species representatives complained about human policies, she would play the message again. To our human friends, wherever you may be. It reminded her that the most important word in that message wasn't help or rescue or emergency. It was friends. and friends, as the galaxy had learned was what humans did best.